Hello everyone, today we're going to look at the definitions of the trig functions. So we're going to start with a right triangle. So remember, a right triangle has a 90-degree angle, and what we do is we have the hypotenuse, which is always the side opposite the 90-degree angle. That's the longest side. And then looking at which theta we're going to look at, which is one of the non-90-degree angles. So we're going to have theta over on this guy. We have the side that is opposite, so across the triangle, and we have the side that's adjacent. Remember, adjacent means next to. So every right triangle has a hypotenuse, and then based on the angle that we're looking at, it has an opposite side and an adjacent side. And we're going to use these three sides to figure out the trig functions. So each trig function is just a ratio of two of these sides, and there are 6 ways that we can take those ratios. So there are 6 trig functions. The first one is sine. So don't call it sin. That's something bad to do. It is written S-I-N-E. So sine. Sine of theta. The trig functions are functions, and the input is an angle. So you have to take something like sine of 30 degrees or sine of 2 radians. It has to be an angle that goes inside the sine. So it's not multiplication, and it's not sin times theta, it's sine of theta, like the square root of 25, sine of 30 degrees. And sine is defined as the opposite over the hypotenuse. Next we have is cosine. So again, not cos, but cosine. Cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. The next one is tangent. So not tan, that's something that happens in the summer. Tangent. So tangent of theta is opposite over adjacent. So if you look at your calculator, those are the 3 trig functions that are on most calculators: sine, cosine, tangent. The other 3 are just going to be reciprocals of these original 3 functions. So CSC stands for cosecant. Okay, so cosecant of an angle is hypotenuse over opposite. So it is the reciprocal of sine. Okay, so sine of theta is 1 over cosecant of theta, and cosecant of theta is 1 over sine of theta. They are reciprocals. The next one, abbreviated SEC, is secant. And secant happens to be the reciprocal of cosine. So it's hypotenuse over adjacent. And the reciprocal of cosine. And then the last one, it looks like cot, but that's something you can sleep on. And it's short for cotangent. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. So we get that it's adjacent over opposite. So again, each of these bottom 3 functions are reciprocals of the top 3. So cotangent and tangent, secant and cosine, cosecant and sine. Each of the pairs of the function and its reciprocal, one of them starts with CO and the other one does not. So as long as I remember that these are the 3 on my calculator and the other 3 are the reciprocals, then I know right away that secant has to be the reciprocal of cosine, because one of the pairs has to have a co. And then as long as I can remember that cotangent and tangent are reciprocals, that leaves sine with cosecant. So it's really nice if you can remember which one's the reciprocal of which, but you will have these definitions here, so you can just look at which one is actually, the other one flipped. Okay, but we are going to use the fact that they're reciprocals later on. Okay, so let's find the trig functions for angle B. So I have a right triangle. Whenever we label our triangles, the capital letters are reserved for the angles, Capital C is always the right angle. It's always in 90 degrees. And then A and B are just one of the other two angles. And then we label the sides with the lowercase labels. Side C is always the hypotenuse. Again, that's always across from the right angle. Now, when it comes to labeling the sides, those depend on which angle the side is opposite. So if I look at angle A, across the triangle is little a. If I look at angle B, across the triangle is little b. So whenever you're writing a triangle up, it has to be in that order. Side C is the hypotenuse, angle C is the 90-degree angle. Then you can choose which of the other angles you call A and B, but the sides have to be the side across the triangle from it. So from there, let's go and find sine B. Remember that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. No matter which angle we're looking at, the hypotenuse, again, is always C. And then opposite for angle B is side B. So sine of the angle B is side B over side C. Cosine of B, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And for angle B, the adjacent side is A. So cosine of angle B is side A over side C. Tangent of B is opposite over adjacent. Opposite is B, adjacent is A. So tangent of angle B is B over A. Now remember, the other three are just the reciprocals. So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so it must be C over B. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so it must be C over A. And then lastly, cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so it must be A over B. And then again, normally we'll have numbers in these, in which case we can simplify the fractions. So we're going to do some of those in a minute. Okay, so find the following trig values. So we have a triangle. Again, the angles are A and B, with the right angle being C. The hypotenuse is side C. Across the triangle from angle A is side A. Across the triangle from angle B is side B. So what is sine of B? So again, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So it's going to be 3 over 5. Cosine of A. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which also happens to be 3 over 5. So sine of one of the angles in the triangle is the same as cosine of the other one. Okay. What about tangent of A? So tangent is opposite over adjacent. So if we're looking in respect to angle A, opposite is side A, adjacent is side B. So tangent of A is 4/3. Cosecant of A. Cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. So in this case, the hypotenuse is 5 and the opposite for angle A is 4. Secant of B is going to end up being 5 over 4 because secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, so 5 over 4. Cotangent of B is adjacent over opposite. The adjacent is 4 and the opposite is 3. So there's something that I want you guys to notice here. If I look at sine and cosine, those are always the leg over the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the largest side of a triangle. So if I'm taking a shorter side, dividing it by a longer side, then I'm always going to get something less than 1. We'll see later we can get negative values. So sine and cosine are always bounded between 1 and negative 1. So if I want to take sine, and the same is true with cosine. Okay, so if I notice 3/5, those are both smaller than 1. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, and what that's going to end up being is the slope of the line if I put this in a coordinate, and we might see that later on in a little bit. But tangent and cotangent can be any number. They can be from negative infinity to positive infinity. So in this case, I've got 4/3 and also 4/3. So those can be anything. On the other hand, the other two trig functions, cosecant and secant, those both have the hypotenuse over a leg. So they have a larger number divided by a smaller number, which means those guys have to be, and again, in absolute value, at least 1. And the same is true again for cosecant. So this is something to keep in mind later on when you're solving things. Does my answer make sense? Sine and cosine are bounded by 1. It has to be between -1 and 1. Cosecant and secant have to be at least 1, and that's something that you should really keep in mind again when it comes to checking your answer. Let's try another one. So we have the triangle. Again, make sure A is opposite A, B is opposite B, and C is opposite C. So sine of A, again, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite is 10, hypotenuse is 26. Now this is a fraction. Make sure you always simplify. 10 over 26 is 5 over 13. Cosine of B, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is also 10 over 26. Since A is opposite, is B's adjacent. And again, that's 5 over 13. Tangent of A, tangent is opposite over adjacent. A is opposite is 10, A is adjacent is 24. Again, make sure you simplify, and we get 5 over 12. Next is cosecant of A. So again, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So we should know that it's 13 over 5. But we can start with the 26 over 10, the hypotenuse over the opposite, and then simplify. Next we have secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So we know that at the end we should get 13 over 5. So secant is going to start with the hypotenuse over the adjacent. So 26 over 10, which is 13 over 5. And then next is cotangent of B. So cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So 10 over 24. And again, that's 5 over 12. Okay, so play around with this and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. Bye.